Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Believe in Lions. It's brought to you by FanDuel. I'm Trevor Thompson, 25 years deep covering these teams here in the Motor City. And today, pleased to be joined by a guy who was with us just last week, Lions insider and senior writer for Lions.com, and also the host of 20-Man in the Huddle. Tim Twentyman is back on the show. Thanks, Tim, for the time today. And our good friend Dave Burkett, four-time Michigan Sports Writer of the Year, author of Detroit Lions and Illustrated Timeline, is on the show with us as well. These guys are as connected to this team as anybody in the business. So it is an honor and a pleasure to have them on this week talking about what the Lions off seasons look like and what the draft will look like going ahead. And Tim, let's just start there right now, and I'll have each of you give a grade so far on how you feel the Lions off season has progressed so far.
Well, I think, we talked about it last week, just with some of the financial constraints that this team had. They weren't going to be major players in free agency. And, we talked last week about, all the reasons why. And so, it was about filling depth and filling some needs. I think an overall grade, I'd give them a B, but I hate giving grades, just like I hate giving draft grades. Like that's, yeah. I know Dave does it. It's popular. I was in the newspaper business too, but it's like you give a grade before you see somebody on the field and what that looks like. And so I hate to do that because we have to see these guys, how they fit into the system and just what it looks like on the field. But I think they filled some needs, center being the biggest one. And so, I'd give it a probably B right now, but I hate giving grades because you got to see it on the field first.
Right. Yeah.
My favorite grade is incomplete for that reason. You don't know when those
wise man.
So many moving parts. And I mean, look, Tim's right. I think we all knew, coming in or, that the Lions weren't going to be huge spenders, and maybe they had one, big move, and, Cade Mays, I guess, was sort of that move, or a medium-sized move. It wasn't the biggest move at the position, but, they had needs to fill on the offensive line at defensive end. To me, I look at it like a lot like a shell game. I mean, they've filled some of those holes, but other ones have popped up, right? You take care of the center position. All of a sudden, you got an issue at tackle. What are you going to do? I don't know if Larry Borum's a starter. He certainly would be on the depth chart right now, but I think you have to address that position in the draft. And so that's why I think incomplete is probably the best grade to give right now, even though it feels like a little bit of a cop-out. But obviously they've taken care of some of the depth issues. I still think they're maybe lacking a little bit of the top line talent that they need at some of those positions to, be back to that, 12, 13, 14 win team that we saw a couple years ago.
What do you think gets them there, Dave? Is it time letting some of their talent develop? Is it going out and acquiring another player? How do they get there quicker? How do they accelerate this timeline?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I say incomplete, right? I don't know that there's any other big moves coming outside of, the top draft pick or two. So I don't know that you can completely, plug all of those holes. I mean, a lot of it is based on who stays healthy and kind of, the breaks that go your way or that don't. I mean, look, the reality is the Lions still have a really good roster with Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, Penei Sewell, Aiden Hutchinson, right, Jack Campbell. There's a lot of top-line talent in the NFL, or a top-line talent that they have on their roster that would be, top-line talent on any team in the NFL. So I don't think this is like a bleak situation where all of a sudden you're looking at the Lions regressing to the Matt Patricia, Bob Quinn years. But I understand, from the standpoint of, fans out there who wanted to see more and wanted to see this team take a big step forward after regressing record-wise last year.
Guys, let's talk a bit about the draft. It's the next big thing coming up. They're obviously going to be able to plug some holes in the draft. I'm interested in your thoughts on their philosophy, where they go with their first pick at 17, what they do the rest of the draft. Is there going to be movement? Those kinds of things we'll get to. But at the top of the draft, things seem to be laid out fairly evenly. FanDuel right now has Fernando Mendoza at minus 20,000 to go number one overall. Do you guys see that right? Is that the guy there at number one? And then we go down to number two. It's Arvell Reese as a FanDuel odds on favorite number two, and then David Bailey the FanDuel odds number three. What do you guys see at the top of the draft, and are those picks accurate in your mind?
Yeah, I think Mendoza obviously fits with what the Raiders need and best available. And so I'd be surprised if that wasn't the number one pick. He's got his pro day, I think, next week. And so I'm sure the Raiders will have a pretty heavy contingent there in Bloomington to see him. And then, I think we're going to see probably a bunch of edge rushers at 2, 3, 4. It could be 2, 3, 4. I think they're going to dominate the top of the draft there. I think this is a very, very deep edge draft. I think it's one of the deepest in maybe a decade. And we were talking to Daniel Jeremiah, I think it was last month. I think, Dave, you were on that call too. And he was saying, like, you could get an edge rusher that could, play significant minutes and contribute to teams all the way into the 4th round in this draft. That's how deep it is. And so I think we'll see the quarterback, and then I think we'll see a run on edge rushers. But this draft is deep in edge. It's deep in receiver, and there's certainly a bunch of tackles. Dave talked about the need at tackle and edge. I think if that fits best available, because we know that's what Brad Holmes' draft strategy is. It's not so much the position, it's the player. If that fits, I think Detroit can certainly fill some of those needs with their first 2 picks at edge and tackle, because it's a good draft in those areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tim and I are in lockstep in how we see the draft, and most people probably are. I mean, there's very little chance it's not going to be Mendoza at top, and then there's another small group there of players I think that would be, blue chip type players, and the chances of one of those guys falling to 17 is probably slim. So that's where, you look at where the board may fall, or some of the strengths of the draft, the pockets of strengths at least. And, Tim mentioned the edge rush class. I mean, if that's as deep as some of the analysts say, and some of the NFL people believe it can be, then, maybe that's not an area that the Lions feel like they have to address right away, because the drop from, number 4 or whoever would be there for them to, number 7 or whoever they might get at number 50 is not as significant as it would be from, let's say the number 3 offensive tackle to whoever might be there in round 2. So I think the way the draft sets up for the Lions, there's a lot of, solid offensive linemen. Some of them have some position versatility who will probably start coming off the board in the middle of round 1. And that just so happens to coincide with one of the Lions' biggest needs. And so ultimately, I think in the first 2 mock drafts I've done, I've given them an offensive tackle, and I don't know that I'll be coming off that anytime soon.
Philosophically speaking, and talking with Glover about this, and talking with other people that analyze the Lions' needs right now and look at the draft, I always thought that they might go for the O-line in free agency, because the intricacies of the position, you want to speed this thing along. You don't want to have to train somebody up. Maybe you go get somebody who's got experience in the league, and you take an edge with your pick there. And then other people think you get high-end tackle or high-end center, or somebody who's got that versatility you spoke of, Dave, at that spot on the O-line, and have them there for the next decade to plug and play. What are your philosophies on where you go at that spot, and how they might approach this from what you guys know on the inside?
Yeah, I'm with Dave. I've in my first 2 mock drafts, I've done an offensive lineman as well, and you just look at the history with how they built that position. And obviously in 23 and 24, that was the strength of this football team. They drafted Taylor Decker. They drafted Frank Ragnow. They drafted Penei Sewell. They've drafted Tate Ratledge. Like, they want to build that spot with young talent. And I just think this draft sets up with what Dave said about, their position being right in the middle there, being able to probably grab the number 3, number 4 best tackle. And now you've got bookend tackles for the foreseeable future. And I just think that's a good way to build your offensive line. Offensive linemen are expensive in free agency, as we saw. Now, I like Borum. I think, he's had 38 starts at both left and right tackle. But I think if you draft one, you create some competition there. And if Borum's your number 3 guy, that's an upgrade from what you had at that position at the swing tackle last year. And it also provides you some good depth, if you have some injuries. And so I just think, again, if the player matches the position, I just think tackle makes a ton of sense for the Lions at 17. And I'm like Dave, I don't think I'll come off, them having a tackle at 17 in my mock drafts.
Yeah, Trev, you look at the history of it. Taylor Decker went 16th, right? Jeff Backus went 18th. I think Gosder Cherilus was 17th. So, you can get a starting caliber tackle, a guy who plays for a decade at one of those edge blocking positions there, right where the Lions are sitting. So it doesn't, lock the Lions into it, and who knows how it plays out. Maui Agua, maybe he goes higher than people think, and Freeling and, Fano, the guys that are sort of considered the top group of offensive tackles. I don't know if one of those gets to the Lions at 17. if they do. I think that's, probably a pretty clear choice. Blake Miller from Clemson's another guy that I've sort of, targeted for the Lions just based on his durability and his, high level of play at a really good school. The Lions obviously have some they can move Penei Sewell to left tackle, right? They have some options on the offensive line if that happens, or however they want to construct that line. So I don't think they're locked into a specific person or a position even. But I think offensive line, if you were laying the odds, since we're on FanDuel, you'd probably be betting that they were taking an offensive tackle at number 17.
Dave laid out a few names there, and I know we don't know exactly how it's going to fall, but you guys have mocked this thing out, and you'll probably do a couple more before the month is over leading to the draft. Tim, who do you think might fall to that spot? And what are guys you would like if you could have your dream guy fall to you at 17? Who would it be right there?
Yeah, just with what Brad likes in terms of the athleticism from the offensive line, and with Penei Sewell in mind, what he took there in his first draft. Monroe Freeling from Georgia is a guy that I just really love. The 99 or 9.99 on the RAS, the athletic rating. Lions like athletic players, and a lot of those high picks have been high on that RAS list. Now he doesn't have a ton of experience. I think he started 16 games, but I think the ceiling is so high for him. A Georgia guy, which they're obviously familiar with, and I just think he fits. He can play left, he can play right. He's an athletic guy. He's a mauler. I just think he fits their kind of style of play. I don't know if he falls to 17. Maybe it's a situation where if you really like him, you have to go up a little bit. Brad obviously isn't afraid to do that from past drafts. But
Absolutely.
Monroe Freeling is a guy that kind of I've targeted, I've mocked, and I guess maybe I'm hoping is sitting there at 17, but I think he's a guy that kind of fits.
Who's the top of your wish list, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, Freeling was the guy that I gave the Lions my last mock. I don't know if he'll make it there to 17 either. It seems like it just from some of the national, pundits that he's got a little bit of helium, and maybe he goes a little bit higher than that. The lack of starts, I think it's maybe not quite like a quarterback, but I do think you want some experience there. That's why Blake Miller from Clemson is a guy that I think would be a fit there. He could plug and play at right tackle right away. Obviously you'd move Sewell to the left side if that was the case. And keep Borum as your swing tackle. Look, offensive line, I think we all agree, right? Defensive end is probably the next biggest position of need.
Right.
I would just throw, if you're looking for a sleeper out there, the cornerback group, if one of those top two cornerbacks falls, just based on some of the uncertainty about Terrion Arnold right now, maybe that's a wild card in this whole mix, that one of those guys gets down there and they really like those guys, then maybe that's a position that they could go as well. That's a little bit off the board.
Is there a world where you see an edge that's still on the board and they might take over any of these O-linemen we're talking about?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly there's going to be some edges there. I don't know that a Reuben Bain is going to fall. As Tim mentioned, he's, there's those guys at the top of the draft, those top edge rushers, David Bailey, Arvell Reese, and Reuben Bain are probably the top three. There's Bain, because of his short arms, might stand the best chance of falling, but I highly doubt it. He makes it to 17. He's such a good player, such a powerful player. So I don't know who that next guy would be for them. Maybe it's a Zion Young, maybe it's Keldrick Falk. There's some guys in sort of that next tier that, have some size or play with some power that could be that guy opposite Aiden Hutchinson. You look at what Brad has done in the past. Obviously, he got Hutchinson up top and Tyleik Williams sort of at the bottom of round one last year. But Josh Paschal, Aleem McNeil, Broderick Martin, those guys have been Levi Onwuzurike. Those guys have been day two guys. So maybe the sweet spot for where the Lions find that defensive lineman is with the 50th pick of the draft or whatever they decide to do, moving up or down on day two.
That's going to be interesting to see how all of this shakes out. And another thing I found interesting, Tim, when you and I were communicating about the show, what we were going to talk about, you mentioned NIL and how it might affect the draft. And I didn't even think that something like that would play into it, but I'm wondering how and why it does play into it in your mind and how that'll play out.
Yeah, a couple things. I had Brian Hudspeth, the director of college scouting for the Lions, on my podcast last year, right before the draft, and I thought he made a couple interesting points. One, how money has changed the NFL philosophy and how they look at some of these guys. And he said, one of the big question marks with guys coming into the draft was always how would they handle money. when you pay these guys, who are they surrounded by? How are they going to handle wealth? What are they going to do with the money? And he said, the great thing about the NIL is we've gotten a view of how these guys are going to handle money and handle wealth. And
already, they've already got a grip on that.
They've already got
studies on that. Yeah.
Much more than they did before. And that's been a positive. And he also said, look, just drafts aren't as deep anymore. Because guys are staying longer, because the money is so good in college, guys aren't incentivized to leave. You see a lot of 4-year guys, 5-year guys, 6-year guys in some cases. And so, he was saying beyond the 5th round, right around the 4th, 5th round, that 6th, 7th round isn't as deep as it used to be. And so, I think the interesting part when you look at the Lions is, look, they got 2 4s, 2 5s, 2 6, and a 7. I would not be surprised at all based on, that conversation I had with Brian. It's just, I don't think teams value those 6th and 7th rounders as much anymore. Just in terms of guys that can come in, compete for starting spots and contribute. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if some of those things are packaged and you move up in earlier rounds, 4th, 5th round. I think that's kind of the line that teams see now as, places where you can get guys that can come in and contribute right away. So I think that's the interesting part of NIL is just teams understand the money part of it. And then just the draft isn't as deep as it used to be. And I think that plays a part in some of those late round movements with teams.
Logically, that makes a lot of sense. Dave, is that something you saw coming or something you would have sort of attached to NIL, how it might affect how teams look at guys and the way they handle money at a young age and how that all figures into things?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, anything they can do to get rid of those late round picks just from a workflow standpoint for us is great. So if they want to trade 6s and 7s and do that works.
With Dave.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know what the age of this draft is, but the drafts have progressively gotten older the last couple of years because of COVID, but also because of the NIL that Tim referenced. And Trev, I'm sure you've heard it, but like some of the numbers out there are astounding for what players are
unreal.
Paid. I mean, it's 6 figures, 7 figures. A good pass rusher is costing $1 million or $2 million, in the portal now. So these guys have life-changing money in a lot of ways already, and it's just a matter of, like, if you're not a guaranteed first-round pick that's going to get to that big payday, why would you leave and give some of that up right away? So I do think that's a big factor in the way some of these drafts have gone. And to say I would have saw it, I don't know that I totally would have saw it a couple of years ago or realized the impact of it, but it's here. And that's why also, look, this it's something that I'm sure I'll write about here before the draft, right? The age of some of these prospects. Akeem Mesidor is a guy that a lot of Lions fans have sort of looked at and wondered if he might fit over the years. He's a 25-year-old defensive end. A couple of years ago, like, you would have had a big, check mark next to him. Like, I don't know if that's worth it, right? I don't know if we want to take a 25-year-old defensive end, because by the time he hits that second contract, he's 29, 30 years old. Well, now, there's a number of guys that are sort of in that same mix that are prospects who have aged up. So I don't know that's viewed as quite the negative that it was for some of those guys. In fact, you come in ready to play, and maybe you can get the most out of that guy on the rookie contract in some ways.
It's just crazy how the NCAA has changed and how this has changed everything. I mean, you couldn't take a recruit to dinner without getting suspended or your program's being investigated. And now it's like free agency. Guys are getting all kinds of money, going to the portal. Who wants to pay me the most? I'll go here. But I'm also wondering how that
come to high schools too. Wait till it starts getting high school.
Unreal. But I'm wondering how that maybe affects guys who do go to the portal and really don't stay in the system, and you really have a tough time tracking how they're used, what system they fit in because they're chasing dollars or they don't like playing behind somebody who's now transferred there, and how all this plays into just how the kids go through the process of playing at the college level. How does that aspect of it figure into drafting and how players are analyzed from what you guys might just assume or think, or what you've learned from in talks?
I distinctly remember asking these questions or hearing general managers talk about some of this at the combine, just because things that I hope to write here in the next month was, and it really is. I think what it comes down to is you have to understand the player situation and try to get to know the whys behind whatever they did, right? Some guys who are chasing the money and might be on their 3rd or 4th school, maybe it still is a red flag, right? That you're leaving for the wrong reasons, or those other coaches, old coaches that they had, they left them with a sour taste in their mouth. Other guys, they can use it to, if you're learning different systems, it can be a positive. If you come in and you show leadership skills right away, it can be a positive. Certainly the managing of the money, maybe you're doing it for the right reasons and you're doing it to support your family. I think everyone has a story. And I think that's, Brad has talked about this before, right? The learning the whys and the motivations behind some of the players. That's an important part, and maybe a more important part than ever, because of all those things going on for teams to understand before they make their draft picks.
Your thought on that, Tim?
Yeah, I agree with Dave 100%. The whys and the motivation is obviously a big thing, but I think the part of it that's a positive is what Dave mentioned about playing in different systems and playing with different teams and how you adjust to those situations. Look, it's a big step going from college to pros, right? There's an adjustment period that has to happen there, and it's not the same. But when you have to learn a new locker room, when you have to learn a new system defensively with some of those guys that have traveled to a couple different spots, I think that allows teams kind of a lens into how they might adjust to that jump in the NFL, to that situation. And so I think it can be a positive and it can be a negative. I think it's a case by case, and it's a case by case perspective, and you just have to really get to know the player, when you're evaluating that.
Trevor, I'll give you a little story on that just to amplify that. I heard this was a couple of years ago. There was a player, I won't mention the school because I never reported it out or vetted it out. Just somebody had told me this anecdotally. There was a player who got $500,000 or so to go to his school. He got hurt. He was cleared to come back. And when he wanted to come back, or when the team was ready to have him back, he said, well, I need to get paid another $500,000 if I'm going to play the rest of the season. And the team was like, the boosters or the
held them hostage. He had a holdout. We had a holdout in college.
And so the collective was like, no, we're not doing that. They won a game. They came back, asked him again. He's like, I need another, $100,000 for each game that I'm coming back. So I think and then he transferred at the end of the season for another $500,000 somewhere else. So I think when there are situations like that come up, that's what raised red flags for NFL teams. They hear something like that, and you're not maybe doing it for the right reasons. You're leaving your teammates out to dry. You're thinking of only yourself. And so those are the things that raise red flags, rather than just a guy going from a MAC school who's going to get paid, $500,000 to go transfer to a Big Ten school and prove himself against different competition. Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors that go into some of those stories.
Yeah. Wow. That's a scary story. I mean, to have that kind of mentality at that age, it's not a good indicator of things to come. But wow, that's the way the world's going, guys. I guess it's a new world order here, and we'll have to adjust and adapt. You guys are going to owners' meetings this weekend, and I'm interested in what you're looking for while you're there, what you think might shake out, and really what this is going to be all about this time around here in 2026 at the owners' meetings.
Well, obviously the rules changes. The league released some of those yesterday, the two proposals by Cleveland and Pittsburgh, and, some of the stuff from the competition committee. And so, some of the stuff surrounding the officiating, I think, is going to be interesting, how they want to use, off-field officials to help in-game decisions, especially when the on-field call is clearly wrong. I think some of those conversations will be interesting, and it's our first chance to talk to Dan Campbell since free agency too. And so I always enjoyed that breakfast, that hour-long breakfast on Monday morning, where we, delve in pretty extensively on all these guys, why they're fits, and just his evaluation, also of his coaching staff, how things are going with Petsing and things like that. So, Rod Wood will talk to kind of the financials and, some of the other business side of football. So, I always love the owners meetings, it gives you a chance to kind of get a whole perspective of where the league's heading with the new league year starting.
Yeah, it's a great event. Obviously the breakfast with the coaches are super important. You get to hear from them. And as Tim mentioned, Dan's first thoughts on sort of the free agent class, how they fit in. I think there's some other questions about sort of the the team. I mentioned, reference Terrion Arnold and sort of the situation he's dealing with. I don't know what they can or can't say, but those are things that they certainly have to prepare for getting ready for the draft. And then, hey, the weather, man, it's like 100 degrees in Arizona right now, right? So I'm not gonna lie, I'm looking forward to that as well. So.
I see where Dave's at here.
I know
where Dave's mind is at. See,
punched out. Hey, Tim, it's baseball. We had an outdoor tournament for my son last week. So sitting outside in 40-degree weather, bundled up, like that was. I'm ready for some warmth.
So, Dave, you're going from Arizona to Hawaii, and you're like, you're all about the weather right now. What is your focus on right now? Actually, we're talking football, but where is your mind right now, guys?
That's football. I don't even know. I'm punched out. So, catch me on the flip side for sure.
Well, it is the off season. It is the off season.
There's no such thing in the NFL.
Well, that's true too. From that standpoint, unless you're Dave, who's going to work at a vacation amidst all this. But when it comes to the rules changes, what do you guys think would be the rules that may get changed and the most important things to address in that area?
Well, they put out a couple of all the proposals that they'll be discussing here this week. I think the one that drew the most headlines, Tim sort of referenced there, was, the administration that they can offer on-field officials in the event that the referees get locked out or are not on the field when games happen. So, maybe there's an opportunity to, I think, more than just this year. I think the important part of that would be what happens in the future with that, right? If all of a sudden they do this and these game-changing plays, I forget exactly how it was labeled, but these game-changing plays that they can assist with, if they have some success with that, maybe that's something that sticks around going forward. So, the rules themselves will be interesting to be discussed and voted on and see what happens, of course. But I think there are some ramifications down the road to some of those rules that, will be interesting to follow, as this thing goes on too.
Mm-hmm. Tim, you got a thought? What you're looking forward to?
There isn't a huge list of rule change proposals, at least from the competition committee. I thought there was one that was interesting from one of the teams. I think it was Cleveland. I think I'm right, Dave, that they're proposing that draft picks can be traded further years down the line, as many as 5 years down the line. I thought that was an interesting proposal. I think that could probably promote more, trade talk around the draft, and certainly when the trade deadline starts, if you can trade, future picks. It's a little bit harder in the NFL because you trade a pick 3 years, 4 years later, you have no idea what that pick is going to be. Is that a late first round pick? A team deals with injuries or whatever, loses their quarterback, all of a sudden that's the 5th pick in the draft, so I think that'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out and what the conversations are around that rule change. But that's probably the only one that really perked my ears. It's a pretty it's a pretty docile off-season owners meetings in terms of rule changes.
Just so people know, I think the rule right now is 3 years. You can only trade picks 3 years out. So that's you go NBA style once you get to 5, and that's awesome. I mean, the GM, there aren't many people that would be around to see that if that thing fails.
Right.
So it will be interesting to see if that one passes.
Yeah, that would be interesting for sure. And then back to the draft for a second. That is in Pittsburgh, right, guys? It's in Pittsburgh.
Yep.
So, Dave, it'll be back to earth for you after AZ in Hawaii. Get a little Pittsburgh in your life.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll be doing this here, but yeah, no, it's hey, that's all right. It was once we get through this little, I thought we were through it. Maybe Michigan is right. It seemed like it was warm weather here coming, and then all of a sudden we got hit again last week. So hopefully, when I get back from Hawaii, it'll be here to stay.
All right. Well, before we wrap up the show, guys, give me one more thing each of you guys are looking for between now and the draft, as far as what the Lions may do or what we may hear coming out of their camp.
I don't know that there's much that you're going to hear. I mean, before the draft, because again, I think the news came out when we were recording this that they had signed Ben Barch, the offensive lineman, who came in for a visit last week. It's those type of moves that are the only things that are left to happen. Sort of these, 1-year veteran filler types in free agency. I think the only other thing that would be on my radar for before then is contracts. We've seen in the past years where Brad's tried to get some of those deals done. Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell right before or around the draft. I guess it's possible that, a Jack Campbell or a Jahmyr Gibbs gets done here in the next month or so.
Yeah, Dave stole my thunder. That was probably mine. I think they're really in draft mode now. You've got obviously the 30 visits, so we got guys coming in here. I think they're pretty much done with free agency. There could be, a depth move here or there. I think it's all about the draft, but I wouldn't be surprised, like Dave said, if a Jack Campbell or somebody like that is extended. But it's really about the draft. I think that's the focus now. Free agency is pretty much put a bow on. We're going to see some pieces here or there, but it's about getting some of these draft picks in the Meyer Performance Center, getting to know them, and really having your ducks in a row when the draft starts, and maybe you get an extension here or there. But I think it's all about the draft now.
A lot to look forward to, because as you guys say, there is no real off season, but there will be while Dave's in Hawaii. So you enjoy that until you come back to reality, my guy. Hey guys, we really do appreciate it. Tim Twentyman, Dave Burkett joining us on this edition of Believe in Lions. It's brought to you by FanDuel. Thanks for listening. Be sure to like, be sure to subscribe, be sure to share, and please do enjoy. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you on the next edition of Believe in Lions, brought to you by FanDuel.